So the room is filling up. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anna Ahlers. On behalf of my research group, China in the Global System of Science at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science in Berlin and the Berlin Contemporary China Network, I welcome you to this new session of our lecture series, China, the New Science Superpower ? Last month, Mark Mutton talked to us about the history of truth claims, especially in the early decades of the People's Republic of China. Today, we are returning to the very present with a big topic as well, innovation. If you claim to be a science superpower, you of course also have to demonstrate that you have innovative capacity, and we'll look at what China is doing in this regard. The global go-to person, if you talk about this topic, is Professor Cao Cong, University of Nottingham, Ningbo. And because he's such a go-to person, we are even more happy that he has been able to make time for us today and is joining us in the late evening hours in China. I will hand over to Andrea Braun-Streltsova, who is a pre-doctoral fellow in the Lise Meitner Group, and also a PhD student at the University of Tampere in Finland in the Higher Education Studies section. She's working on international collaboration between Europe and China and the experiences made over the past decade. And she's going to introduce Professor Cao to us. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. And as Anna already said, we feel extremely lucky that we can welcome Professor Cao Cong today here with us. Professor Cao is a professor of innovation studies at the University of Nottingham in Ningbo. Born in Shanghai and educated in China and the US in both natural and social sciences, Professor Cao has worked at the University of Oregon, National University of Singapore, State University of New York, and University of Nottingham before joining the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China in 2015. This is where he's based in Ningbo. I think that Professor Cao needs no introduction to our audience. He is one of the most prolific and widely cited scholars in the social studies of science, technology, and innovation in China. He has published extensively on China's scientific elites in his 2004 book, China's Scientific Elite, published by Routledge, on innovation, especially in nanotechnology and biotechnology, such as in his 2018 book, GMO China. And he's also a co-author of China's Emerging Technological Edge, assessing the role of high-end talent with Dennis Simon in Oxford University Press, and Innovation in China, Challenging the Global Science and Technology System with Dennis Simon, Richard Applebaum, Han Xueying, and Rachel Parker, also 2018. His papers have appeared in many international leading journals of science, technology, and innovation, including Nature, Science, Physics Today, or Research Policy, as well as many edited volumes. He's also the author of the 2021 UNESCO World Science Report chapter on China, and his research has also appeared in most mainstream media, such as The Economist, New York Times, South China Morning Post, and many other outlets. In his writings, Professor Cao sheds light on the connections and tensions between Chinese science, innovation, and the government. Last but not least, we're also very happy that Professor Cao is also affiliated to our Lise Meitner research group as an external advisor. And that will be all from me. Professor Cao, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea, for the kind introduction. It's really a pleasure for me to get invited to present a study of mine recently. Basically, this is a little bit different from the original title. It's a joint paper with my collaborator Sun Yutao at the Dalian University of Technology. This is basically forthcoming in Routledge Handbook on Global China. For those of us who are familiar with what's going on in China in the areas of science, technology, innovation during the Reform Open Door area, we always are very impressed by some of the quantitative kind of indicators. For example, in the last year, 2022, China spent about 2.55% of its GDP on research and development, which is among the leading countries in the world. It's only lagged behind the US and surpassed Japan, surpassed the European Union as a whole in quite a number of years ago. And China also possesses the largest talent pool in the world. If we take a look at it, China's one of the indicators with regard to human resources in science technology, we find that China has more than 100 million full-time equivalent, according to the OECD UNESCO standard measure human resources in science technology. China's human resource pipeline is also full, and especially its quality has been improving, because we're going to talk about that a little bit later about the role played by higher education in China's science technology innovation, and especially it's catching up with global science technology innovation development. If we take a look at the Chinese publications over the years, the number of Chinese publications has been on a significant rising trajectory, measured by the number of papers published in journals indexed by Science Citation Index. China now ranks number 2 in the world. In 2021, and China inventor filed the most number of PCT, so-called PCT patent applications. And the Chinese company Huawei also led the world in terms of the number of filed by an organization. And if we take a look at the Global Innovation Index, which is produced by WIPO and the Cornell University, we also find China ranked number 11 in the world in last year, which was a very significant improvement over number 34 in 10 years ago. We can basically find China's achievement of the status as a rising global power in science, technology, innovation came from its indigenous efforts. At the same time, China also has taken advantages of the benefit offered by globalization. Basically, we see China's indigenous efforts along with its increasing global integration, which have given China the rising status in the world in terms of its scientific power and its innovation efforts. And this is kind of very unique and exceptional feature of science technology system of China. Basically have enabled innovation in China to embark on distinct trajectory, as well as highlighting the challenging that the country has been facing, because the characteristic of those kind of development has something to do with something called test dependency. And at the same time, the international environment is not as friendly as China had experienced in the last 40 years. So basically those kind of depending on not only indigenous effort, but also increasing integration into the global science technology innovation system at the current situation probably has posed more challenges to the country if the country really wants to do well in the coming decades in the areas of science, technology, and innovation. Basically, in this presentation, I'm going to present the development at these two fronts: China's indigenous efforts and also China's increasing integration into the global innovation system. And then try to see what kind of challenges China has been facing, or China is facing right now going forward. Let's start with take a look at very briefly about China's science, technology, innovation in the pre-reform area, and especially to see what kind of legacy those kind of pre-reform area has left for China, and what kind of lessons China learned from those kind of legacies, and especially for China to do in the last maybe decade or so. As we all know, China's science and technology systems start to shift in as soon as the establishment of the People's Republic in 1949. Of the 5 components of the science and technology system, we know the Chinese Academy of Sciences was established just 1 month after the founding of the People's Republic. In addition to the Chinese Academy of Sciences, we also see that China has other 4 components at the time. University, which became at the time focused on education, significantly separated its research function from itself, because China at the time followed the Soviet model in research and in education. The third components in China is something called research institutions affiliated with industry sectors. Each of the Chinese government agencies had its own kind of research R&D kind of institute. Many of those kind of industry kind of ministries also had their own universities. That's the third component. The fourth component we usually talk about is at the time is the national defense system. At the time, the burgeoning kind of national defense system started to form, but at the same time, this system depended very much on the Chinese Academy of Sciences for the development of the system itself. Not only see the transfer of scientists from the Chinese Academy of Sciences to the national defense system. At the same time, the CAS also contributed very significantly to the efforts of China's nation building and national defense effort, national defense R&D efforts. The last but not least is industry itself. Many of the Chinese companies at the time probably is just called a factory or industry complex, had their own kind of R&D establishment, but mainly they were focused on solving the own problem facing each industry complex, right? At the same time, they also depended on kind of industry ministry, especially its R&D institute and the university, for solving a more generic kind of problem, especially those kind of applied research. So we have these kind of 5 components of the science and technology system. Those kind of formation of the science technology system, those kind of components, still we can see nowadays in China. Of course, there has been some sort of reform to change the science and technology system to make it more effective, efficient, and responsive. But the kind of the components, the big components, the shape of the science and technology system hasn't been changed that much over the last maybe 70+ years. We also see during that period, the early reform period of time, many of the research actually kind of program actually were having those sort of politically driven and motivated to kind of go for the development, especially this kind of high profile program. When we talk about this kind of high profile program, basically we say it's about the strategic weapons program. At the time, probably that's the only program that hadn't been seriously affected by various kind of political kind of campaigns, including the Cultural Revolution. Those sort of programs actually have set China onto a trajectory to become a powerful nation in some of the areas of science technology, but also help boost China's international status under isolation. To start with, isolated from the world with the United States, and then isolated because of the break between China and the Soviet Union. So for a significant period of time, China science and technology system, it was separated from the other part of the world, and the Chinese scientists and engineers didn't have too many opportunities to work to study with their fellow scientists elsewhere, except in the early period of time, or maybe just before the Cultural Revolution, there was some sort of kind of opening between China and some of the European countries. For example, we see our president, our past president, President Yang Fujia, who used to the president of Fudan University, and also for a period of time until his sudden pass away last year, spent some time in the middle of 1960s in Denmark, along with some of other his kind of fellow scientists. So by and large, during most of the first 17 years plus 10 years of Cultural Revolution, the Chinese system of science technology actually was separated from the world. We also see within this kind of high-profile kind of research program, especially the strategic weapons program, there was some sort of relatively autonomous research environment. Basically, it means the scientists working on strategic weapons program were allowed to preserve some sort of peer review system, allowed to get access to international literature, and allowed to have some sort of debate within themselves. We also see something called a competitive kind of horizontalism by using the term by Ivan Feigenbaum in his book about China's strategic weapon, the role played by scientists in the strategic weapon program before and after the reform, by which basically he means allow scientists within those kind of strategic weapons program to compete with each other horizontally, because at the time this program involves scientists from different components of the science and technology system. We see this kind of horizontal integration and horizontal kind of cooperation, but at the same time, we also see this kind of horizontal kind of competition between scientists working on that. Now, one of the very significant legacies of this complete reform kind of S&T system, especially the strategic weapons program, is the so-called the whole of the nation system, the 举国体制. This kind of mobilization of human material and financial resources actually has been inherited not by has been inherited by scientists working on some of the research program, including those planning program and on including something like a medium and long-term plan, a 15-year medium and long-term plan. You see those kind of imprint of the pre-reform legacy. You see that especially the 举国体制 has been having its impact. The other things we also have seen is that China start to embrace techno-nationalism, starting from the break between China and the Soviet Union, and China learned a hard lesson from that period of time. So something like 自力更生, self-reliance actually became one of the legacies. Last but not least, much of the research during the pre-reform era actually was separated from the economy. You see, scientists always were criticized. Scientists during this period of time were always criticized for hiding themselves inside the Ivy Tower. Doing their own research. Ignore what's going on outside. That didn't care too much about the application and the commercialization of their research. Things start to change in the reform area. We start to see those kind of efforts of the indigenous kind of efforts. When we talk about these indigenous efforts, basically I mean several aspects. One is the governments, the party states start to come up with various kind of innovation strategy or science technology strategy and policies. from the decision on the reform of the science and technology system in 1985, and then decide to put forward another strategy to revitalization the nation through science, technology, and education. This kind of 举国体制 kind of 科教兴国 kind of strategy. 2000 both years 1985 and 1995 are critical because of the reform and also because of this 科教兴国 kind of strategy. All these kind of efforts, all these policies have been accumulated for the government to work on those medium and long-term plan for the development of science technology, 15-year plan for the period between 2006 and 2020. One of the hallmark of this MLP is so-called indigenous innovation kind of strategy. China tried to make efforts and really want to become innovation kind of oriented nation by enhancing indigenous innovation capabilities. Of course, I mean, when those sort of indigenous innovation strategy actually at the time got some sort of become controversial for a period of time because the international community fear China will become close the door again and then become self-realized again. And the Chinese government officials in charge of science technology had to come up to explain to the international community saying, we are not going to close the door. By indigenous innovation, we not only mean we are going to come up with original innovation, but at the same time, we'll still kind of try to absorb technology, science from outside China, and we try to integrate it. We try to come up innovation through integrating science technology achievements from elsewhere. Then in 2012, this very important strategy is something called the China really want to continue its efforts to reform its science and technology system and try to accelerating the construction of the national innovation system. The concept of national innovation system was introduced actually to China around 1995 when the Canadian research center was invited by China's then State Science and Technology Commission to do a kind of 10-year review for its science and technology system reform. But it is until 2012 the government actually said we are going to accelerating the construction of the national innovation system. Basically, it really feel that over the years, China probably has made some achievements here and there in science, technology, innovation, but there was a lack of kind of systematic kind of approach towards the issues regarding science, technology, innovation. So the national innovation system kind of construction become again a very important kind of topic to be raised in a kind of party and a kind of state council kind of document. Then in the November of that year, a strategy for innovation-driven development was out. And the last but not least, actually, in 2015, China came up with Made in China 2025 kind of strategy, focusing on innovative and smart manufacturing. Again, this time, this Made in China 2025 actually raised concern in the international community with regard to China's efforts. What does the effort mean? Etc. Whether China is going to be taking over manufacturing by its own effort, it will ignore, will not participate in international collaboration, etc. Okay. We basically see over the years, China has come up with a slew of science, technology, innovation-related policies. Those policy system covers not only science, technology, but also has component the industry policy, financial policy, tax policy, and fiscal policy. You have the system of policy, right? So they basically these policies jointly have made China's science, technology, innovation policy more coherent, more integrated, and more improved package of innovation strategy. It's not just for science, technology, innovation, because when we talk about science, technology, we basically means supply side, government try to provide some money for scientists to do research, try to come up with kind of public goods, public knowledge. But we really also need the other kind of policies, other kind of tools, other kind of measures to help achieve the goal in science, science and technology, innovation, etc. Okay. One of the important things, as I just mentioned, is about the reform of the science and technology system. Starting from 1985, that has been going on for almost 40 years. We have seen over the years different kind of strategy, different kind of policies have come up to make the domestic innovation system more effective, efficient, and more responsive. But when we say responsive, basically we mean responsible for responsive to economic development. Try to change the situation that has challenged China for many years. That is the lack of linkage between the research sector and the economic development. And the political leadership actually has required Chinese scientists and engineering to orientate their work toward the international frontier of science, basically, especially in the basic scientific research area. Try to orientate the activity towards major national demand and also the major battleground for national economy. So they really need to play their role helping nation building, and also especially in the areas of economic development. These are the three actually 面向 put forward by the political leadership, maybe between 1985 until something like early decade, first decade of the 21st century. And then when President Xi Jinping took over the leadership, he also mentioned that the Chinese scientists really try to do the work, try to help the healthy life of the Chinese people. So these kind of 4个面向 actually has this kind of strategy actually have guided the work of Chinese scientists and the Chinese engineer. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing, basically, we see over the years, the society as a whole has increased its funding for scientific research. As I just mentioned, when it's 1995 was a very important watershed, because at the time the 科教兴国 strategy was put forward for the first time. At the time, China spent about 5% or 0.5% of its GDP on research and development. But last year, the percentage of GDP used for research and development increased to 2.55%. Right? We probably still remember in the 15-year science technology plan, medium and long-term plan, China set a goal for 2020 when the government and the plan actually required about 2.5% of its GDP be spent on research and development. Although it took 2 more years for China to fulfill that goal, but we still have to recognize China's GDP has been on a fast rising kind of trend, right? So by and large, China has spent the increasing amount of its GDP on research and development. So that is very kind of remarkable kind of achievement for China. Although it's a little bit late for China to achieve the 2.5 kind of percent of GDP on R&D kind of goal. The last but not least, probably China actually has make tremendous efforts to develop its human resources. We all know China is the largest country in the world in terms of the total number of researchers. It already took over the US a number of years ago. The Chinese higher education system also is the world's largest, right? Because especially in late 1990s, the government decided to expand its higher education system to make higher education from elite type of education to become kind of mass education, right? Probably that was a hedge against China's looming challenge of an aging society. And that's probably those efforts will be failed in the coming years. China's production of graduates at all levels of higher education now top the world. China produced in the last couple of years probably 10 million undergraduate students, about 1 million postgraduate, including about 100,000 PhDs. All these numbers are remarkable. And the average number of years of schooling of Chinese citizens aged at 15 and old increased from 9.91 to 9.91 year in 2020. That was the result of that year's population census, from 9.2 and 9.08 year in 10 years ago. That was the sixth population census. So that was also very significant. Such a large and increasingly high quality talent pool has provided ample supply to meet the demand of knowledge economy that China has been pursuing. So I think that's also very important. Let's recap. In the areas of indigenous efforts, we start to see the efforts of the government try to increasing R&D expenditure. And we also see the government make efforts, and it's not just government, the societal try to make efforts to come up, to try to develop its human resources. All these are under the background of the government in the last almost 40 years, come up with a significant package of science, technology, innovation policies. So at the same time, of the Chinese scientists, the Chinese government, and the Chinese companies make efforts in making this kind of indigenous effort, we also see the Chinese innovation system and the Chinese scientists also have become increasingly integrated into the world. We know when China started open, you see those kind of investment from initially Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, and gradually from Southeast Asia countries. And then when China started open, China, especially after China became a member of WTO, China has become a very important place to attract foreign direct investment. Along with those kind of investment, we also see those sort of technological know-how, managerial kind of expertise actually also came along with those kind of FDI, right, to support economic growth initially, and then may also help China to upgrade its technological level. We also know initially those kind of foreign direct investments was in the areas of low tech, kind of labor intensive area. But later on, the investment, the foreign direct investment from overseas, especially from multinational companies, start to in those kind of knowledge and capital intensive kind of area. And gradually, they also bring more kind of expertise to Chinese, because the government allow more those kind of wholly owned kind of form of foreign direct investment instead of joint ventures. We also see more foreign companies start to establish R&D centers in China. Again, that's around towards the end of 20th century. We see kind of big companies like Microsoft, Intel, etc. Each of these two names actually spend about $100 million to set up the R&D centers in China, of which Microsoft Research, Microsoft Research China has evolved into Microsoft Research Asia. And there are many other multinational companies R&D center also have been doing relatively well in China, try to take advantage of the policies, preference kind of treatment offered by the Chinese government, and especially kind of local competition for those kind of high-end foreign direct investment and these kind of corporate R&D kind of activities. So at one time, the number of those kind of foreign corporate R&D centers reached 1,800. Of course, not all these R&D centers are engaged in those kind of genuine R&D activities. Quite a significant number of them actually were involved in things like localization of technology developed in their headquarters, try to come up with kind of technology service, etc. But we do see some of the multinational companies really have their efforts in research and development. These kind of R&D centers have become their corporate, part of their corporate innovation network. They came up with basic scientific research. They came up with kind of technologies and products which try to fulfill their corporate kind of goals in terms of technology, innovation, and product development, etc. We have some sort of statistics. We basically see in the last maybe 10, 15 years, the contributions from foreign corporate side to China's R&D expenditure vary, but we can see over these years, about China's total R&D expenditure at about 15% actually came from foreign direct investment, and it came from those kind of foreign corporate kind of R&D activities. So this is very kind of significant, very, very significant. We don't know going forward. We see some sort of downward trend, but probably the trend will continue. But even that's the case, we still cannot ignore, at least for a period of time, FDI and the foreign corporate R&D actually made very significant contributions to China's R&D efforts. Secondly, we see another kind of very significant trend in China, which is with the approval of the government and also with the initiative of the individual Chinese students, we see quite a significant of Chinese students going overseas. And also quite a significant number of those overseas going students actually return after they finish their study abroad. That is because of the government's policy. Again, we see early on, the government basically indicated we support overseas studies and encouraging return and allow students to come and go. That was actually in the early, late 1990s, late 1980s, early 1990s. Right, the later and the serving the country actually was added to this kind of 12. This is called, the earlier policy was called the 12 word policy because that have got 12 Chinese characters, and then later the 4 more words actually added, which is serving the country, the 服务国家, and also later the serving the country also changed to playing a role, which means if you are a student, if you are a Chinese student, you used to be a Chinese student, and you went abroad to study, you can come back to serve the country. And you can also help the country remotely, as long as you can play a role, right? You see basically the significant change of Chinese government policy towards overseas studies. And if we take a look at the statistics by 2019, of the 6.56 million Chinese students studying abroad during the reform open door area, about 64% of them actually have returned to China after finish their studies. And in 2019, in this particular year, about 700,000 Chinese students went abroad as students. And also at the same year, we see about 580,000 students actually return, right? With a return rate of 79%. It's very, very high percentage of Chinese students actually return to China for a period of time and also for a particular year, right? I think those kind of trends, we don't have the latest statistics, but we can say for sure those kind of rising trend has been intact, okay, over the the last couple of years under the kind of COVID-19 kind of situation. And if we take a look at this statistic, basically we can say China is no longer experiencing a brain drain. Okay, that's the situation in the early 1990s or maybe early 21st century, late 20th century and early 21st century. There was a big concern. There was big concern about the brain drain issue in China. Okay. That's the second component in terms of China increasing integration into the global innovation system. Thirdly, we see international collaboration in science technology between Chinese scientists and their counterparts elsewhere also has been on a very significant rising kind of trajectory. Okay, as we just discussed, some of those kind of collaboration actually involve the returnees, right? This is very, very significant percentage of the Chinese students have to return to China, right? And it is if we take a look at this kind of statistics by using the number of publications in science citation index journals, the share of Chinese international collaborative paper increasing from about 20% in 2010 to 26% in 2016. That's the number I have right now. Probably in the last, towards the end of 2020, probably 2019, just before the COVID-19 kind of outbreak, the number probably is also on the rise. Okay. We see the leading collaborators with Chinese scientists, including scientists from the US, from the UK, Australia, Canada, Japan, and Germany. These are the 6 leading countries in terms of Chinese scientists actually working with. Okay. The most recent data actually also are available to pinpoint the role of the diaspora in China's participation in international collaboration. As I just mentioned, on the one hand, you see the role played by returnees. On the other hand, those kind of diaspora actually also help Chinese scientists to collaborate with their counterparts in the world. Right? So those sort of collaboration, I think in 2009, 2010, we did a research about the international collaboration between China and the US. We actually found the very significant role of the Chinese diaspora in the US. The role very, very significant. So probably up until the outbreak of the COVID-19, those sort of collaboration between Chinese scientists in mainland China and their counterparts, the diaspora in other countries, also very, very kind of significant. Now, what's going on, right? Let me move on to the third part of my presentation. As we already discussed about China's indigenous efforts, and also discuss about China's kind of increasing integration into the international global kind of innovation system. But the international environment actually has become increasingly hostile for China, as there has been a very sharp escalation in tension between most of the developed country in China. We know what happened between the U.S. and China and the Trump administration, right? Kind of sanctions against Chinese companies, including Huawei and etc. And sanctions against some of the Chinese organizations like research institute, universities, right? So these kind of Chinese organizations, Chinese enterprises actually have difficulties accessing the most advanced technology, know-how, and components. Right, that's the situation we already know. And such a situation actually qualifies as a harbinger for a new kind of global approach to China's innovation, which is also in the search of opportunities while encounter challenges. Oh, so those kind of situations actually has kind of affect China's efforts, and then China's kind of effort to become an innovation-oriented nation. And probably China will continuously encounter challenges in this regard. In addition to that, we also see Chinese students and Chinese scholars are less welcome at leading international institutions of learning. The number of Chinese students studying the US universities has been dropped very significantly. Someone said that is because in the last couple of years, someone said that is because of the effect of the COVID-19, but probably there are also deep reasons because of the kind of anti-Chinese student, anti-Chinese scholar kind of atmosphere, kind of environment in the US, not necessarily at the US universities, research institute, but the kind of general kind of political environment is not that friendly to Chinese students and the Chinese scholars. We also see the Chinese international students, scientists become reluctant to collaborating with their Chinese counterparts, right? And recent kind of news story in Nature basically said that the Sino-American journal publications are peak in 2020. Afterwards, start to see some downward trend in terms of the number of publications involving Chinese and US kind of collaborators. And again, I mean, the U.S. government initiated, come up with this China initiative, targeting China's effort to attract overseas talents, especially those in the Southern Talent Program, China Jihua, right? And also, targeted some other kind of programs like Made in China 2025, military kind of civilian kind of fusion kind of program. And last but not least, China still run a very large kind of IP kind of deficits in terms of the royalty payment and the royalty royalty payments and also royalty acquisition. This is a little bit of kind of old kind of data, but basically seeing in terms of quality of kind of Chinese publication, right? We see on the one hand, the role of the returnee is very, very significant. Comparatively speaking, of those Chinese without international experience, right? In terms of this kind of high impact kind of publication. But on the other hand, we still see a significant number of overseas Chinese. They are, I should rephrase that. Overseas in terms of quality, overseas Chinese still doing better than returnees. Of course, they are, much better than those Chinese, indigenous Chinese scientists, right? So it really raises some sort of issues. If China start to be isolated, Chinese scientists or Chinese science to be isolated with the international community again, right? This time it's not just like what happened in the late 1950s and early 1960s with the Soviet Union, right? This time, many of the developed countries start to see China probably differently. What will happen to the quality of the Chinese scientific publication? So that's a big kind of question mark. We don't have the data to prove or disprove. We just guess there might be some sort of very kind of serious and a negative kind of effect. Okay. Okay, the future basically is uncertain for China's efforts to become innovation-oriented nation. As we said, there have been kind of two legs. I mean, if we use a kind of analogy, right? China's science, technology, innovation kind of efforts basically depend on these kind of two legs. On the one hand, it has depended on its own kind of efforts. On the other hand, it also depends on its increasing kind of integration into the global innovation system. What will happen if the other component of China's kind of innovation as science, technology, innovation efforts got broken? So that will have very serious kind of consequences for China. Okay. Since 1978, the Chinese government has just tried to recap. Chinese government has come up with a series of policies, right? And the research committee has engaged in generating new knowledge and making efforts, making breakthroughs. And universities has turned out an enormous number of undergraduate and postgraduate students, right? So these kind of indigenous efforts, together with China's active participation in the global scientific community, have turned the country into a formidable player in science technology innovation, right? These two forces have been mutually reinforcing. Now China is at a very serious kind of juncture, not just as to where it will head to in the future in science, technology, innovation, but also as to whether it will go backward to self-reliance or autarky as the nation was in its first 30 years. China's leading edge in research has been kept by weak underbelly, and the research remaining derivative in many aspects in nature, right? With the work done in developed countries really still driving much of China's R&D efforts. Okay. And China's PCT kind of patent application have been rising, but the question is whether they have been translated into quality improvements of these patents measured by transnational kind of patents. As the largest country of origin of temporary visa holders earning doctorates at the U.S. universities, China has been the majority of this. Its national with U.S. PhD degrees still stayed in the U.S. after receiving their degrees. And the last but not least, probably the publication of Chinese science, obviously Chinese still high than those of the researchers in China without the overseas experience, just as I just showed in the graph, one of the graphs. More published Chinese researchers moved to the USA, Europe, and other developed countries. On the one hand, we see the return migration, but on the other hand, we still see, especially those kind of young scientists, still would would rather move to other countries to start their scientific career instead of staying in China. Right? You see those kind of course, you may say this kind of two-way kind of mobility is quite normal, quite healthy, but we really have to see who actually move back and who actually move away. So right, the cutoff of Chinese students and scholars from the international frontier research will significantly slow down China's pace to become an innovation-oriented nation and a leading science and technology power in the world. Okay. In a word, China's tie with the world is being endangered. China may have to ride hard into this kind of anti-globalization headwind and probably uncharted territory by strengthening its own efforts. So as I just said, I mean, over the years, China basically used these kind of two forces actually try to reinforce each other. But now, one of the forces actually encounter serious challenges and difficulties. what China will do is still a question mark. So that's the reason I said in the future probably is a little bit uncertain for China in the areas of science, technology, innovation. I stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.